this afternoon's talk on a text adventure in Python. This is Jeffrey Armstrong. He'll be your speaker when he's not talking about text adventures in Python. He is found walking the delicate line between Fortran, Python, and 8-bit computing. So hope you all enjoy the talk today. Go ahead, Jeff.
All right. Thank you very much. So like he said, today we're going to do a little bit of a text adventure in Python, okay? So this is going to be kind of a quick-paced talk because I got to keep moving because I'm going to be making mistakes as we go, I'm sure. So let's get started. What we want to do today is actually build a text adventure from scratch, okay, using only components of the Python standard library. So we're just going to go through and make a very basic game. So it'll be just the start of what we can actually use as a text adventure base. Okay, and maybe along the way, I hope to introduce you guys to maybe some good modules in the standard library. Probably a lot of you are going to be familiar with at least a few of them. But I think it'll be an interesting little talk here. So I want to go into a little bit of the history just for one slide and just for a few seconds here. Today we're talking about text adventures. Sometimes they're called interactive fiction if you want to make them sound a little more artsy. These were games that were much more popular when graphics were a problem on computers. So, you know, a lot of the time you want to make a nice rich game with rich settings and a nice, just a fun thing to play. Now, when you're dealing with graphics in, like, let's say 1982 on a Commodore 64, it's kind of suboptimal trying to draw these, great settings that you're thinking of on these terrible, little tiny graphics chips. So a lot of the time they would go in and just do it in text. So it would be like reading a book to play your game. And a lot of the time they'd have like a command prompt. So you'd say what you wanted to do in the game, like go north or, go up or open door, that kind of thing. So that's basically the gist of what a text adventure that I'm talking about today at least entails. Back in the day, there were quite a few commercial entities that were actually making text adventures. I mean, Infocom is probably the most famous one. And a lot of the games still enjoy a cult following today. So there is a community that still continues to write this kind of stuff. So let's look at what we need to create a text adventure to get started. Oh, actually, first, I just want to say we're going to be doing this live. So if anybody wants to follow along, I have this GitHub account right now. There is some code there that is pretty much useless. There's nothing there to speak of. But maybe as we go, it'll get a little more interesting. You guys can try to pull it and play it as we work. Okay? So, necessities. What do we need for our text adventure? Well, we need a few basic things. We're going to need a command prompt, right? Because we want to talk to our game and tell it what we want to do. Okay, we want to say we want to move over here, we want to go through this door, that kind of thing. We're going to need locations to visit, right? So we're going to need some sort of persistent world that we can explore, walk through, and interact with. We're going to need some sort of game file to describe that world, right? This has to be persistent and it has to be continually persistent. We don't want to type our world in every time we start the Python interpreter. That would be obviously a terrible plan. And also, for it to be a game, you're going to need things like puzzles, items, characters in the game you can talk to. Probably not going to get to too many of those, but we're going to get a good head start on what we might need to build on, okay? So the first thing we need, we'll walk through these pretty quickly. First thing we're going to need is a command prompt, right? So in Python, the standard library provides something called the command module. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. I actually learned about it via talks at PyOhio years and years ago. The documentation describes it as support for line-oriented command interpreters. So basically, it gives you a prompt and you can write custom commands, or you can write a class that can accept custom commands and do things based on those commands, right? The best thing about this is it is absurdly simple to implement. It makes it one of my favorite modules in the standard library. I use it for a whole host of things. Let's say you're doing some sort of like a web development or something like that. I've used a micro framework that some people might be familiar with named Aspen. And a lot of... that's a very bare bones framework, so I needed a back-end administration module, and being one to just want to get things started, I actually use the command module as my back-end, because it's quite secure if you have to SSH to a server first to even interact with it in the first place. But the command module might lack some power. It doesn't do things like parse sentences or anything like that, but it's very good at one-word commands. Okay? So let's get started a little bit. Now, in my source code here, I have, everybody see this, or is this is very bright. Looks a little washed out, but this is our game so far, okay? I cheated a little bit and put up this little skeleton here, okay? what we want to do is create a command prompt. So when we use the command module, it's actually quite simple. We're just going to import command, and then to create a command prompt, we're actually going to subclass a class in the command module called CMD. So we're just going to go ahead and do this, cmd.cmd. All right? And we have to initialize that too. Okay, and now at this point, I actually have a functional command prompt. This is all you're really going to need to get started. Now to launch my command prompt, I just have to tell my game to start running a command loop. Easy. And now we have a command prompt. Now, one thing we're going to need is some commands for this thing to actually interact with, right? The way you're going to enter a command in the command module is very simple. You're going to do _ and your command. So we want to be able to exit our game. That's very important. So let's just do a quit, okay? So this method I'm writing here, you can see it says do _ quit. That means in our command prompt that we're writing, if I type the word quit at the command prompt and hit enter, it will directly call this method do quit in our class here. And what we can do now is, since this is going to quit, we can just do like a print, thank you for playing, right? And we're all set. That'll actually print this command. To exit a command prompt, if any method that is called as part of a command returns true, that exits our command loop. So we can just put a return true. Okay? Now, this should actually work. We have a functioning command prompt at this point, so we can pull up a command prompt here. All right. Sorry, we're doing something else before. And we can go, I'm in the source folder here, so I'll just do python game.py. And this should start our command prompt. Now, it's going to look kind of lame because I'm using a lot of default things, but you can see I have this command prompt here. And I can type help. It'll tell me what commands that I have implemented. Right now I have quit. I can type quit. It exits my command prompt. So we actually have some of our game done already, right? Now you can see that it said it was undocumented command. In the command module, one easy way to document things, well actually it is the easy way to document things, is if you just add a doc string to any of your methods, that'll go ahead and give you help for that method. So you can just do leaves the game, right? So now if I were to type help quit, that would actually tell me leaves the game in the command prompt. We're going to hold off on trying that because we need to put in some stuff for our game to actually be interesting. So the big thing I'm going to do today is just get it so we can move around in this world we're creating, right? Now usually in a text adventure, the most common thing is to implement like the cardinal direction, so north, south, east, west. And usually the way we're going to do that is just use single letters, abbreviations, right? So just N, S, E, and W. That's the quickest way to get things done. Now you can see if somebody were to type north, I'd have to write another method to handle that, but for now, we'll just do N. So if you were to type north into my game, it won't work, right? So this is going to be go north, right? And we'll do pass. And we need a south, east, and west, right? And let's see here. And now, at this point, we should have commands to go in the 4 directions, right? Pretty simple. All right, and this should work now, too. So if I go ahead and start up my game again, let's try that again. We can see help. So we have north, south, east, and west as functional commands. I can do help north. We have this, so it tells you that means go north, right? So at this point, we have a game where we can move around inside our world, and we can do quit. Now, obviously, we can't move because all I did was pass on those methods, so we're not doing anything interesting yet, right? And the reason we're not doing interesting is we have nowhere to visit. So we have to start thinking about how we're going to do like our world, right? Now, a lot of in interactive fiction or text adventures, a lot of time you're going to refer to places as rooms, even though it might not be a room. You might be in a field or something like that. But let's just go ahead and we'll refer to any location in our game as a room. Okay, now I've cheated a little bit again, and I've actually created a room class that's very basic. So I'm going to open that up for you. Let me do this. Options editor. I meant to turn on this first. Okay. This is our room class, right? Now, basically, when we're talking about rooms in the game, why don't we make this nice and simple? Rooms will have an identifier, so just an ID number for our room, right? We're going to have a name for the room, so where we are, a description of that room, and then we need a dictionary of neighbors, right? Actually, I have a slide about this. I'm getting a little too caught up in coding. All right. So we just need an ID, name, and description. We need a list of connected rooms, so you can know that such and such a room is north of this one or south of this one or whatever. We need a list of maybe items in the room, so if there's things you can come pick up in your room. You need a list of characters that you might be able to interact with in your room. So that's the real basics of a room. Now in this class that I actually have implemented, I don't have anything but a description and neighbors for our room. So we're going to stick with that for today. Now you can see by default I'm going to pass in an ID, right? So I can define my ID, a room, name, the description, which will just be text, and then the neighbors I'm actually using a dictionary. And the reason that's interesting is now I can just check for rooms north, south, east, west. I'm not using like some sort of list or array where I might have nuns in it or anything like that. We can just use a dictionary. So if somebody asks for room with key N or the neighbor with a key N, we can just return that neighbor's ID. If not, we'll just return none. Pretty simple. I already have some convenience functions here that'll just give you north, south, east, west, as you can see down here below. And that's it. So that's pretty much all we need for a room. But there's a big problem here, right? We do have rooms now, but we don't have objects. We just have classes. So we need some sort of way to have persistent rooms in our game. Now, when we talk about object persistence in Python, a lot of people are going to jump right into the pickle module, right? That would let us serialize room objects pretty quickly and easily from within Python. There's a lot of problems in this application with thinking like that. One thing about pickle is usually it's used to actually take an object that's in our interpreter, right, and serialize it to disk, right? So we already have the object. We don't have any room objects at this point. So if we were to use pickle, I suppose we could go ahead and type in our rooms in the Python interpreter and then save them to disk or something like that. Or we could write a room editor, and have that be pickling our rooms to disk. But that's a big hassle. I don't want to do that when I develop my game. I just want to write text files, let's say, or something like that. And pickle's not really going to let me do that. I guess conceptually you could write pickle files yourself by hand. I don't think I'd recommend that. I don't particularly understand what's going on with them, so that would be a bad idea. So what other options do we have, right? Well, we could write text files, right? They would be hand editable, so that would actually meet that requirement. But let's think about that now. How would we actually format a text file to handle this game? Well, you'd have to do some sort of like schema for our text file. Like first line would be the room's ID, second line would be the room's name, third line would be the description, and then fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh line would be the neighbors in each direction or something like that. That's got a lot of problems, right? Because that implies an arbitrary formatting. So what happens if we want to extend our game, right? I've talked about using north, south, east, west. Now, what if I say this isn't going to cut it? I need northeast as a direction too in my game. Would that mean I have to go back and edit all my text files to add northeast? There's no room there. That would be a miserable experience because I just wrote, let's say 60 rooms, and now I got to go back and change all the text files just because I added direction. That's an awful idea. So we need something that can provide that expandability. So that's why I think a good way to go with this one would be actually to use the JSON module. So who's familiar with the JSON module in Python? Okay. So basically, JSON is just JavaScript object notation, right? But that's going to allow us to have serialized rooms, right? But unlike pickle, I can just write them in a text editor, and then when I load them in using the JSON module, I'll just get a dictionary back from that module when I do the load. And that's actually pretty exciting now, because now I'm not parsing any text files manually. I'm just getting a dictionary back with everything I need in it, right? And it's also expandable via adding fields. So because it's going to actually load in as a dictionary, if I were to add northeast later in time, I would just add a new key, northeast, and a new value for the room's neighbor, let's say. So very simple to actually expand it, and it won't break existing rooms if I do it that way. Pretty awesome, right? So let's go ahead and actually make that happen, right? So I'm in my room file again. If I can find... There we go. Okay, so we want to be able to load rooms from disk, right? So we're going to import JSON. Now, the easiest way to do this, I guess I could expand the class to have some sort of class method or something like that on, but let's not do that. Let's just do define get room, right? And we want an ID, so we want to know what room we're loading. Easy enough, right? Now, we could store the room ID in our JSON, but that seems a little, we don't need to do that because we already know we need the ID to be like our text file name or something like that. There's no reason to actually put it in the JSON too. So that would just be redundant. So let's go ahead and we'll just assume that our file names, we'll say return is equal to none in case we have anything bad happen to us. And we'll say with open. So we'll call our rooms string ID, right? .json. Oops. Okay. All right. Does anybody have a problem with that? I'm just going to open the file. So it's going to be the id.json. It's going to be the name of the text file. I'm going to load from disk, right? I'm just going to load it in as F. So that'll be easy enough. Now I'm going to do something here that some people might say, well, why are you going to do that? So I'm going to load all the text first, and there's a reason for that. But we'll do f.read. Okay? And then using the JSON module, I can get a dictionary from that JSON text. So I'll just go ahead and do json.loads. So that's just loading from a string, right? And then I can just pass it the JSON text I just read out of the file. Now I have a dictionary of information that I can use for my room. Let's go ahead and create a room, and then we'll just finish this up. So let's add a new file here. This is what happens. I'm in the completely wrong directory because somebody insisted I fixed a bug before I did my presentation. All right, here we go. So let's add 1.json. So we will start in room 1, okay? So if I open that up.
You want to move that into the rooms directory?
No, I don't. All right, so we need a few fields. We're going to need a name of a room. Now, I thought for today's game, it's going to be pretty exciting. I thought we'd write a game where we actually find our way to the registration desk at Pi Ohio. So I don't know how many people entered from High Street, but when you entered the Ohio Union, you entered the Great Hall. Okay? All right, and the description of our room is, let's say, you're standing in the Great Hall. Oops, probably should capitalize. Don't want to get any of the alumni upset. Okay. It's very red. It extends to the west. All right, that's our room. And now we need a neighbor, right? So let's do this. This is why I think this is awesome. We're going to do neighbors. Whoops, got to spell things right. And we'll say, see, I can just add to the west, we have room 2. Whoops. Awesome, right? And that is our entire room. So I just wrote a room, and I didn't have to actually do any real programming to speak of. So back in my room class, I'm going to load a dictionary that's going to look, oddly similar to what you see here, right? And then I'm going to create a new room object based on that dictionary. Return is equal to room, right? And we'll say ID is equal to our ID. Name is equal to. Now, there is, of course, a better way to do this. Like I could use some sort of thing that would convert, dictionaries into classes automatically or something like that, I'm sure. But this is the star.
Star D passes the dictionary as keyword arguments.
Does it?
Yeah.
All right, let's do that.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I need ID, though. Good call.
Or you could do it.
No, this is good. All right, like this?
Yeah.
Everybody think that's going to work? Okay, let's go back to our game now. All right, so this get room, that should load a room. Awesome, right? So if we go back to our game, let's import from room, import, all right, get room. Awesome. Now when we start our game, right, we'll have self location is equal to get room. We'll start in room 1, right? Okay, now we need a few other things here. Right now we can't move around, so let's quickly write a move class. Now you'll notice while I'm writing this, I didn't put a direction in front of it, or a do underscore in front of this. That means move is not going to be a command in my command interpreter. It is just a method that's in my class. So it doesn't affect how the command prompt's going to work, right? So when I do this, it will do, all right, we need an ID. New room is equal to, from our current room, location, Now I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use one of my private methods because I don't have time to actually do any sort of switching between north, south, east, west. Okay, and we'll have this right here. All right, so if new room is none, we'll say you can't go that way, right? Else, we'll go ahead and make our location the new room. Right, so this is pretty exciting. Now, the other thing we have to do is tell people about the room we're in. So why don't we go ahead and just put in something that'll actually print out what the room looks like right now. Okay. Again, this isn't a command, although look is a command in most text adventures. We can put that in later, but let's not bother right now. So when we print out our room, right, we're going to need to print self.location.name. We're going to need to print the description. We'll put a blank line in there. And we'll need a description of the room. Dot description. Right. That's all we need to show the user, right? And when we start the game, we should probably tell them what it looks like. Okay? All right. Does anybody see any problems so far?
Are you in Python 2 or 3?
We are in Python 3. If you're not in Python 3, shame on you. All right. The other thing I didn't do is actually let it move around, so let's move. All right. So now we should be able to move if we had more rooms, right? So that is kind of our limiting factor right now. But we should be able to start the game, see if we can load our one room up, right? So let's try running this again. And I have a typo. So get room. It's equal to get room 1, huh? I know what I did. I didn't return anything from this function. Yeah. Well, say it next time. Don't do All right. Let's give this a shot, huh? Yay! See, we're standing in a room. And check it out. If we try to go north, we get an error. So, you know what I did? I misspelled a method, so that's pretty minor. See, so back in game I said neighbors. I think the actual call is neighbor. That's what happens when you don't actually follow your own API. So, we now have a system where we should be able to move around in our rooms, right? So, I cheated once again. I actually implemented probably the worst description of this building we're currently located in. So, I'm going to go ahead and copy from rooms snar.json. All right, so we have 13 rooms now. Pretty exciting, huh? So let's try playing our game again. All right, so it says it extends to the west. So let's go west. All right, what happened there? So we went west and nothing happened, huh? Oh my gosh.
We didn't do look.
You're right. So when we move, we have to do a look. Very good. There we go. All right, success. Now we got it.
Couldn't you rename look to do look?
I could, and then I'd have to pass none as the arguments to it, and that would, in theory, work. But then none might be a dangerous thing to pass as arguments because somebody might type in look at, so I'd have to be able to make sure.
To keep look as a separate method?
Maybe. Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't have called it look and just said print room or something like that, just to make it not ambiguous. All right, let's try going west. Awesome, right? And we can go west again. Oh, look at this. We have descriptions and everything. Now, does anybody notice anything terrible about this game so far? I do. This text looks awful on our screen, right? I mean, we're just cutting the text off right in the middle of a word and stuff like that. That's not acceptable at all. So how are we going to fix that? Well, we need to think about trying to fix our descriptions so they fit in our terminal, right? So the obvious way to do it is text wrap. This is an awesome module that's in the standard library that actually does all the text wrapping for us. So let's go ahead and we'll implement that in our game so it doesn't look quite so bad. All right, so let's do import text wrap. Okay, and the only place where we actually handle descriptions is in look, so this will make it easy. We'll just do for line in, and so all we're going to do in text wrap is call the wrap function. And, oops, right? And how many columns should we go with here? We'll do 72 so it fits on our teletypes. All right. And then we'll do print line. Now, hopefully I did a good guess here, and this will actually look right. Sorry, I haven't actually committed any code back to the repository yet. Just trying to keep moving here, but let's try this again. Okay? See, there we go. We have text wrapping now. So if I go west, that looks a lot better, doesn't it? So now everything's looking very keen. This almost looks like an actual game. So if I keep going west, now I'm at the Great Hall here, but you can notice, who remembers walking upstairs to get to the registration desk this morning, right? We have an extra dimension that we now have to add. And like I said, I didn't implement that at first. Well, that's going to be a little bit of a problem. But actually, it's not really a big problem because we use JSON for our room formatting, and everything's pretty generic, right? So if I do up right now, it just complains to me, right? And you can see if I open one of these rooms that I just created, that I just copied in, I believe 6 is a good example. You can see it has neighbors to up and down, right? So I just have to put that into my actual game here. Just needs a couple more commands. And you can see that I'm actually just using almost everything I've already written. And this is all mostly due to using the JSON module. So we move up, find, do down, right? Okay. I don't know what you guys think of, like, if I'm, like, kind of all over the place when I do my code editing and stuff like that. I know my wife complains when she watches me try to use a computer that I'm a little bit just all over the map trying to do things as quick as possible and usually failing. So, all right, so let's give this a shot. All I did was add up and down as directions, right? So let's try our game now. All right. Let's see if I type up in the first room in the Great Hall. All right, I can't go that way. Awesome. So let's go west and west. And let's see if I can go up the stairs to the second floor, the stained glass lounge. So actually this is now working. So I now have up and down functioning in this game. Right? Pretty exciting. So this is almost a game, I think. We're almost there. Why don't we do a little, or let's do a git add -a, right? Awesome. All right. Whoopsie. All right, huh? We'll just push this up so every... Oh, I don't have Wi-Fi on. But anyway, let's keep moving, all right? Now, so... Right now we have up, down, left, right, and we're loading from JSON text files on our disk, right? This is pretty exciting. The only problem here is let's go back and look at what we have so far, right? If I look in my game directory here, basically my game consists of now 13 JSON text files and a game.py file and a room.py file. Let's ignore that last py file for a second because we're going to see it in just a moment. But this is a pretty ugly way to deliver a game. If you're to deliver something with just 13 or 14, or if this were a big game, we might have 150, 200 rooms just sitting around in their own text files, and that looks kind of lame. You don't really want to provide users with that. So why don't we package it up? Wouldn't it be neat if we could fit it all into one file? All our rooms would just exist in one game file. I think that would be ideal. So how are we going to do that? Well, we could take it. They are JSON, so we could write just one big, giant JSON file and put everything in that. But, I don't know. That gets a little messy because now we only have one file. It's going to be a little harder to edit or something like that. So it might be more fun to keep them in separate files. So what we could do is, when we're distributing the game, packaging it up for distribution, we could pack all our rooms into a single file of some other format. My favorite way to package things in that kind of context would be to use the SQLite 3 module. Everybody familiar with this module? It's basically just going to provide you with a single file SQL database on disk. So very exciting. Now, you're looking at this game, you're probably thinking, well, I have neighbors, rooms, descriptions. These could all be you could create a nice relational database out of this. But I don't want to do that because I've already shown you that just editing the JSON has been kind of, advantageous. So I don't want to go ahead and start creating columns that are north, south, east, and west because And SQLite altering tables is one of the more miserable aspects of that. So a better way to do it, in my opinion, is just to dump our JSON directly into the database, right? So why don't we already have this room context where we just load based on an ID, right? We just pull in JSON. Why don't we just create a database table called room, and we'll just have an ID as the first column and our pile of JSON as the second column, right? That would be kind of neat. And then we don't actually have to change how we've been working thus far. So let's go ahead and look at what I'm talking about. So I said ignore that 2db.py file here. Just for a second, I think I should have maybe Wi-Fi. Let's try to get push here. All right. There you go. So if anybody wants to download the game, you can play it before I actually ruin it with this database. All right. So this file, all I'm doing here is I'm going to go through. You can see I'm just going to do a list directory. I'm going to check if my file ends in a JSON extension. And if it does, I'm going to load it into the database. I'm not going to parse it. I'm not going to do anything like that. I'm just dumping it into the database. Who cares? Okay. Now you might think, well, now you can't hand edit your files. Sort of no. But you can see that if I scroll down a little bit, I'm actually doing an insert or replace. So in theory, you could, quote, build your game by editing your JSON and then just running this script each time to pull in the modified or changed rooms, right? Now, we only load our rooms in one location, so this is actually pretty quick to change. Let's go ahead first and create our awesome database file. So this is just going to be python 2db.py, and we need to give it a file name that we're going to dump it into. All right, pretty exciting. So now, if we look in our directory, right, we have game.db. Okay, so we have no need for all these JSON files for now. I have a backup of them, but who cares, right? So let's go ahead and delete star.json. All right, this seems kind of like destructive, right? So now my game looks a lot leaner, but we have to go ahead and implement our new loading routine. So in this getRoom function, why don't we just call import, right, SQLite3. All right. Now this is why I actually loaded from the text string instead, because I'm going to actually load from the database now. So we'll open a connection to the database, right? And the file was game.db. All right. And we just want to do for row in con.execute. So all I'm doing here is I'm just going to write a quick SQL query, right? Select JSON from rooms where ID equals question mark. See, I'm even being safe with my SQL programming here, so I shouldn't be susceptible to attacks now. All right. Okay, and now if I pull in a row, right, I can just go ahead and my JSON text is now just going to be the first column in this result. And we'll just break after this. There shouldn't be more than one, but we'll be careful, right? Okay, so this is all I've changed, but it should load all my rooms now from the database. Has anybody seen the issue? Very nice. All right. Anything else? Everybody good? All right, let's go see if this works. All right, we just want to run our game. So if I get any response from this, then that's going to be a good sign, right? Awesome. So we're still loading our rooms from the database now. So now we're in just one file. This is pretty neat, right? So this actually has some good side effects that we're using a database, and I'll explain that. Let's do let me see, add dash. All right. Oh, no exclamation points. Awesome. All right. So our next thing is that since we're doing this in a database, we have like a neat side effect here, right? Our whole game is going to be in a database, but we need some other interaction with your game. Most certainly, though, what we're going to need in the future is be able to save our game, right? So we need some sort of game state, and we need to be able to write that out. Now let's think about that for a minute. If I were to actually implement like an inventory or object system, I would have to be able to like pick something up in a room, right? And then it wouldn't be in that room. So I've kind of actually modified the room, right? That's going to be a little bit of a problem when I try to think about how I'm going to save my game state. So am I going to go through and like save a script of what the user did and replay it? That's going to be maybe possibly slow or erroneous if like a version changed. Or should I do something? It gets a little questionable is what you should do. But remember here, now that I'm in a database and I'm actually modifying a room, why not use the game's actual internal database as its state, right? And this has a neat side effect. Since we're using SQLite 3, it's all contained in a single file. So a good way to do this is we're going to start with a clean database, right? And since it's just one file, we can take that clean database and make a temporary copy of it somewhere on disk. And then while we play the game, we can go ahead and modify our actual game database as we play. So if we unlock a room, we could just add a direction to that room and a neighbor that's affiliated with it. And now, just because we're using a database, we don't actually have to worry about saving a game state because our game state is the game database in itself. So to do something like that, all we want to do is use the temp file module and shutil, okay? So temp file I'm going to use just to create a temporary file somewhere on disk. Shutil, I don't know how many people have used that, but obviously this that provides shell utilities. So if I need to copy a file, this just copies a file. I don't have to buffer it in, read it out, or anything like that. SQLite can actually do some more fancy things. Like one way you might want to do it is SQLite has a backup facility that you can abuse to pull a database into memory instead of actually working on disk and then back it up. Using the backup thing, you can resave it to disk if you'd rather do something like that. But let's ignore that for the moment. We'll go with a very simple route. So I can take my clean game, make a copy of it, and then work with that in my game. So that changes a few things, but not particularly that much, right? So let's go back to our game. And when we start up, we're going to import just these two, import shutil and import temp file. All right. So we're going to do two things here. First, we need to create a temporary file. Now, I'm going to go ahead and use a deprecated temp file method. I don't suggest you use it, but I realized it was deprecated about 20 minutes ago, so off we go. It doesn't matter. So we're going to do self.db file is equal to temp file.mktemp. All right, apparently this isn't safe, but it doesn't really matter. Who cares? All right, and what we want to do is take our game database, and using shutil, we'll just copy our clean database into a temp file. Right? So we want to do game.db, right, self.db file. All right? And now, instead of doing get room, we'll actually tell it what database we want to pull from, self.db file, because we hard-coded in game.db to our method to pull rooms. So we can do this now, and it'll actually pull from a temporary copy of our game. So in room, just add this in here. Just connect to this one instead. One thing I did wrong here is I don't actually close the database connection, so we'll go ahead and do that too. All right. All right. Now, when we run our game, it should make a copy of our game database and then play using that instead of actually using it internally, or using the clean copy. That way, if we wanted to, we could write to that database. So we could save player state. We could make a new table in that database, save player state. We could modify rooms as we play. Like if you were to say, let's say you go into one of the restrooms on the first floor and you find like probably a national football championship trophy. They probably got a couple of those just lying around. And you could pick that up, but then it's not in the room. We could just rewrite the room. And then you can start thinking about puzzles, like, oh, if you pick up this trophy, then all of a sudden you can get into one of the rooms on the second floor. And all you would do to do that, there'd be some programmatic coding to say, oh, you have this object, you can go in here. But all it would do is add a direction to our neighbors' dictionaries in our rooms, and we could save it back to that temporary database. And we haven't actually modified our actual game now. So let's go ahead and see if we can play the game now. Okay, so it created a temporary copy of our game, and it's still working, right? So that's a good sign. But since we're doing this so simply now, we can do something interesting. We can also implement save games just like this, right? You can just do a do save. And because we're using SQLite, this isn't actually a dangerous operation. Saves the game. All right, that's a misspelling. All right, so we'll just do, if anybody tries to save a game, we'll just copy file, and we'll copy our actual temporary copy of our game here, DB file, to whatever the user wants. Okay? And then we can just do print save to, and we'll give it a...
Isn't args an array?
It is not. Args should be, I don't believe it is an array. I believe it's everything that occurs after the command.
It's a string.
Yes, I believe it is a string. We could try it. I mean, I might be wrong. So, if I do this... All right. So I'm going to go ahead and just try my save command. All right. So now when I look in here, all right, I have a test.save. You can see it's exactly the same as our other database in size. That's not surprising. We don't actually modify it in this implementation of the game. But we already have saving available, so you can go ahead and build on this and actually implement interesting things in this game, right? All right. So that does sort of work. Let's try, again, like you just suggested. What if I do save to my file? Or .save. See, it is a string. So you can see that if I quit the game here, yeah, to my file.save is just sitting there, right? So what we have now is we actually have a text adventure where you can walk around. The last thing we're going to need before I push the final code is if we reach room 13, right, the last room that we're going to get to, let's just exit. So, all right, if new room, whoops, is equal to 13, right, we will violently exit Python. All right. So now you should win if you can find the registration desk when you play this game, right? What's that?
Did you define exit anywhere?
In Windows, it just works. I believe. Yeah, I might be wrong on that. So.
It's standard library. It works in the interactive problem, but it's not. You don't get it for free in the interpreter.
Let's all experiment. Let's all experiment because I know how to get to the registration desk. Right? We go. Oh, we have a failure. What happened here? We didn't implement our database name in one of our get room calls. We have to put this in. I hope you guys are all enjoying the syntax errors. So let's give this a shot. So if we go west, we can go up to the second floor. There's nothing on the second floor, so we have to go to the third floor, right? So we want to head north from there. We're outside the round room. Let's go north one more time. There we go. Exit, and we violently exit the game, huh? All right. So, what did we actually miss when we made this game? Well, there's a few things that I didn't implement in this presentation. One would be like a status bar in our game. You know, it could say what room we're in currently. Or, give a score if you're playing the game, something like that, right? So we don't actually have anything like that in our game. We also don't have anything interesting to do other than get to that room, which you could see took me, 5 commands and we're there. So we're also missing... So if you want to do a status bar, you'd want to look at the curses module that's in the standard library. My mind tends to melt when I try to start doing any sort of curses programming. You can get there using it. The interesting thing about the command module is you can redirect its standard input and output. So you can actually take that command module input and output and push it into, say, like some sort of text window you've created in curses. And that way you can actually get some sort of status bar to work. So that's a pretty neat idea. Also, you need characters. That would probably just be another table in our database, something like that. Puzzles, like I said, you could start doing puzzles that would actually modify rooms or characters and stuff like that. And also advanced text parsing. Advanced text parsing would be like talk to somebody or give something to somebody. Now, as you can see, those args that come in with your command are just a string. So it's up to you to actually go ahead and parse the args that the command interpreter is going to provide to each method and figure out what to do with it. Now, you might, if you were really into it, you could use something like NLTK and get really deep into what's going on here. Or you could just, I used to do it in one of my games where I would just split on spaces, remove anything that was like a preposition or anything like that, and then just guess at what they meant by it. So if you say talk and then, John, it would just talk to John or something like that. They understood that was a command. But we just don't have that in our game right now, but it's pretty easy to implement. So where we've been, we've looked at the command module. We went through the JSON module, text wrapping. I don't know how useful that is to everybody, but it is a fun find in the standard library. That made me excited when I found it. SQLite 3 is my preferred database. I use it over everything else, including production servers. It's fantastic. It's always there and it works. So, temp file, which I actually misused, so go ahead and look at that. And shutil for copying files and that kind of standard stuff. So if you want any more, I actually have a Python text adventure on my GitHub account called Robot Adventure from 2008. So please excuse the setup.py file because it was built specifically for the Pi Week competition. So it contains a lot of code to handle uploading to the competition server and stuff like that. So just ignore that and just go ahead and play the game. But it's a pretty ridiculous game. It uses an actual relational database instead of JSON. Also, if you like to write games, Pi Week's coming up. I think that's going to be in September for this year. You have 1 week to write a game from scratch. That's how I actually ended up writing a text adventure in Python in the first place. If you really want to write a nice text adventure, you can go ahead and enter the International Interactive Fiction Competition. Entries are due this September. If you wrote an entire text adventure in Python, you probably get a lot of mixed reaction because most of them don't use Python to write text adventures, but it's an idea. So, thanks for listening. These are my contact information, so if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer. You could probably write another subclass. Yeah, you could just, another, and it would just call that and start its command loop first. So, what's that? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. So the question was, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to repeat my questions. Can I actually have like a different set of commands if I'm in some other sort of mode? And I suggested you could create another command module class or command class that could handle those, and you would just execute another command loop, and they wouldn't interact with each other necessarily. So. Any other questions? Well, thanks for listening. I appreciate it.